This guy, the very definition of a sword prodigy, could practically pick up any weapon and be a master in seconds. He'd trained so relentlessly he had blood-stained palms to prove it, and after dropping out of high school, he didn't stop there. He dedicated the next 2 decades to slicing and dicing his way to the title of the country's top swordsman. Naruto might have needed a Rasengan or 2 to stand out, but this guy? All he needed was a kitchen knife. One bustling day in a restaurant, the staff were managing the usual crowd when the chef's phone decided it was time to be heard, despite supposedly being on silent. One staff member noticed it, and the chef, looking almost as annoyed as Saitama on his off days, wondered if it was from that game he swore he'd deleted. Just then, a staff member notified him that Mr. Kim, an unexpected guest, had arrived. The chef told them to lie, tell him I'm not here, but Mr. Kim wasn't buying it and strolled right in, stating he was here for the answer he'd been waiting on. He explained he'd given the chef plenty of time to mull it over, and for someone like our boy who handles knives all day, it should be easy work. Pulling out a suitcase full of cash, Kim proudly announced an advance payment of 300 million won for the task, almost like a Dragon Ball villain trying to bribe Vegeta. But the chef, with the precision of Zoro slicing through steel, made it clear Mr. Kim was in the wrong place. This was a kitchen, not some underground guild meeting. Ignoring the cash, our boy demanded Kim leave. Offended, Kim shouted that the sword saint shouldn't be wasting his talents on cutting fish. But our boy grabbed his kitchen knife that made Mr. Kim and his entourage scared. They quickly fled, but not before Kim vowed he'd be back. As the dust settled, one of the staff couldn't believe what he'd just witnessed. 300 million won. He declared that if he'd been offered that, he'd take it in a heartbeat. Curiosity getting the best of him, he asked why the chef refused. Our boy replied, saying he's only ever been good at slicing fish heads. He's no thug. The staff member teased, saying that if he used his reputation as a swordmaster, he could scare people into paying up without spilling any blood, and maybe buy a house with the cash. But our boy shook his head, saying he'd turn it down even if it were billions. Then, noticing the chef's phone pinging endlessly, the staff member joked that maybe he was secretly dating someone. Embarrassed, our boy brushed it off, muttering that it was just a dumb game notification and not wanting to admit he was still into divine protection like an old-school anime fan still rewatching Sailor Moon. As the cleaning staff headed out, our boy lit a cigarette, reflecting on how he'd spent most of his life working after his family went bankrupt when he was young, always on the grind for cash. His phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Annoyed, he decided to delete this dumb game. With nostalgia kicking in, he tapped the screen, and the game loaded up with the classic intro music that practically screamed, "Welcome back, Senpai." There they were, the same beautiful characters, still as captivating as ever. Just as he was deep in his anime world, his phone began to lag, and a bright light appeared that caught him off guard. After a while, one of his staff called out that the boss wanted him, but the chef was gone, leaving his phone behind. As it lay there, the screen flashed, completing the character transfer. It was only the beginning. Maybe this would finally be the arc where our boy went plus ultra. Upon spotting the game's interface, our boy knew exactly what he was dealing with. Pay to win? Check. Auto hunt? Check. Like every other mass-produced mobile game. The type was so familiar, he didn't even need the tutorial. So why did he play this game? Apparently our boy was enchanted by the digital waifus. Yup, you guessed it. Your classic 2D crush. After pouring in way too much cash and playing through countless hours, here he was, no longer the overpowered MC or even a snarky side character. Nope, he'd been demoted to full-on background character. Now, he was someone whose very existence no one noticed, let alone cared about. Talk about being ice-guyed into NPC hell. Now in this world, he went by the name Kangjiyama, and while he could hardly call himself an OP protagonist, he adapted quickly. The Korean setting looked almost identical to what he knew from real life, just with some swapped-out names and slight quirks here and there, kind of like how anime changes Tokyo Tower's shape but keeps everything else the same. A full year rolled by, blending game and reality into a haze, and our boy was starting to forget which was which. Here we go again, he thought, because just like in his past life, normalcy was the one luxury out of his reach. After school one day, he came home to his parents congratulating him as Great Sword Master Kong, practically beaming with pride over his Hoakin Academy acceptance letter. He started to sweat, trying to brush it off as no big deal, but they only doubled down, praising him like he'd just been named Hokage. They insisted on bragging about him left and right, and he knew his dream of a peaceful, normal life was now on par with finding the One Piece. Forget laying low. It was just not in the cards. With the entrance ceremony just a day away, he can't escape the hype that everyone's buzzing about. In his room, he packed a few essentials, though he paused when he found a family photo. Staring at it, he wondered how the hell does this Kong that he'd possessed even made it into Hoakin Academy. Then it hit him. Apparently, Kong had awakened divine powers last year, passed the entrance exam, and waltzed right into the academy. Plot twist. He'd taken over the life of a bona fide genius. Divine powers here were basically like cheat skills, rare and coveted, dividing society into ranks like Goku's power levels. But not everyone possesses these powers, as they typically manifest through genetics. Society is divided into 3 classes based on the presence or absence of divine power: the privileged, the commoners, and the poor. Hoakin Academy, he quickly realized, was an elite fortress disguised as a hero academy, keeping all the overpowered, hero bloodline kids within its fancy walls. He laughed to himself. He was one of those geniuses. But why was the heroes needed? Well, obviously because of the Demon King. Yup, the good old hero versus Demon King drama. Our boy once again realized that it's not his old world. And a hero training school is just like re-enlisting in the military, and, as expected, a status window popped up. There it was, a skill called painlessness with a cooldown of 12 hours. Great, he scoffed, because feeling sore after fights was my biggest concern. Then his eyes landed on his main divine power, the blessing of the sword god. Sure, the name was fancy, but the effect? Meh. It let him cut anything he slashed, but only if his weapon was exactly 30 centimeters long and 5 centimeters wide. He chuckled, realizing he was bound to a kitchen-sized blade. As the absurdity sinks in, our boy concludes once again that rarely does life go the way he wants. He checks his packing and realizes his equipment is forgotten. He knows even tens of millions is the cost for the lowest grade E-rank gear, while hundreds of millions is needed for average seating. Treasures in themselves, A and S-rank items are likely. He understands that the tuition alone is exorbitant, and he doesn't want to spend more on something forced upon him. However, he has to bring something since the academy requires equipment, or he'll make a bad impression on his first day. With that thought in mind, he decides to go to Daixo for a weapon. Suddenly, a memory of his first master interrupts his thoughts, recalling the insistence on a Japanese sashimi knife that cost over 100 million. He finds himself thinking again about that old geezer, remembering his words. A true master never blames their equipment. The next day, our boy stepped into the academy, decked out in his crisp uniform, feeling like the underdog in a shounen series. But before he could settle in, someone questioned whether the equipment he carried actually belonged to him. It was the day of the entrance ceremony, and during the equipment inspection, he confidently pulled out his sashimi knife as his chosen weapon. A kitchen knife? A nearby upper-class student snickered, ready to assert his dominance like the classic anime bully. Do you really think this academy is a joke? The inspector demanded, clearly unimpressed. You think it's acceptable to use a kitchen knife for the class placement test? With a calm demeanor, our boy replied, "This is my weapon." This answer made the upper-class student speechless for a moment. He shouted, but our boy didn't hesitate to clarify that he was a special student from a modest family, and the tuition alone must have been a huge burden on his parents. The instructor paused, glancing at the color of his name tag, which revealed his lower-class status. It hit him that for a student not from the upper class, the academy's fees would indeed be a significant burden. A wave of realization washed over him as he thought about how wrong it would be for an institution that claimed to promote equal education to push away someone so sincere. Our boy seized the moment, adding, "Blaming equipment is something only amateurs do. A master never blames their tools." He knew it sounded a bit odd coming from a teenage boy, but somehow those words felt profound, like he was channeling a grandmaster vibe straight out of a martial arts flick. The weight of his eloquence and unwavering spirit finally made the instructor realize that this boy was the real deal. With a nod of approval, he accepted Kong Jiama's weapon. Grateful, our boy thanked him. The student behind him recognized him as a special admission student. They whispered among themselves, wondering how someone like him ended up in such a prestigious academy. The instructor, catching their hushed chatter, quickly snapped at them to quiet down, reminding them that after their evaluation, depending on their actions, he could either be their angel or their devil. Hearing this, our boy felt a wave of PTSD, hit him like a shounen protagonist's traumatic backstory, and decided it was best to make his escape. He found a bench outside, taking a moment to breathe and reflect. Even though he had expected the scrutiny, experiencing it firsthand was still unsettling. Having completed the equipment inspection and survived the entrance ceremony, All that remained was the class placement exam. As he sat there, contemplating his situation, he realized he had really made it to Hoakin Academy, known as the hero training school where he would be studying for the next 3 years. Looking around, he noted how different the academy was from what he had seen in the game's graphics. If he had to exaggerate, he'd say the academy was the size of a small town, incredible. Attending a school meant for the upper class felt surreal, especially since he had to drop out of high school due to family circumstances in his previous life. Soon enough, the class placement test was announced, instructing students to gather at the training hall by 1 p.m. While the entrance ceremony was over, our boy understood that the class placement test was still incredibly important. As he contemplated his upcoming challenges, he picked up his sashimi knife, wanting to get familiarized with it. Remembering his master's advice, never put the knife down, not even for a single day, he felt a twinge of nostalgia. After 20 years of living by the knife, he wondered whether a 1-year break had dulled his skills. Curiosity piqued. He removed the cover from the knife and found it was far better than he had expected. He decided to test it out by cutting a leaf or two. Suddenly, a system notification pinged, announcing that the weapon had met the activation conditions, triggering the blessing of the sword god. However, because both his physical body and the weapon were too low level, the system initiated suppression to synchronize with him. Our boy's jaw dropped. He couldn't believe that simply drawing the knife had activated the blessing. As the synchronization completed, the system wished him the blessing of the god. But before he could process this, an overwhelming wave of pain coursed through his entire body. "I'm gonna die," he thought, panicking as he suddenly found himself in a strange, ethereal space. Confused, he shouted, "Where am I?" In a panic, he hurled the knife away, and instantly, the space around him returned to normal, bringing him back to reality. His body throbbed painfully, and while he grasped the concept of divine power activation, he couldn't shake the feeling that the chaotic world collapsing around him was tied to the sword god's blessing. The backlash was unbearable. Even though the divine power of painlessness offered some relief from mild soreness, it couldn't help with the agony he felt now. Our boy realized that using his skill like this was unsustainable if every activation came with such pain. Just then, the system sent out a reminder for all students to gather at the hall immediately. Knowing it was time for the test and unwilling to leave his divine weapon lying on the ground, he reluctantly decided to pick it up, assuming the pain was just a one-time activation thing. But as soon as his fingers grazed the blade, a fresh wave of agony shot through him once again. Meanwhile, in the training hall, all the students had gathered, while parents chatted about the exorbitant cost of admission. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted as Lord Klinge entered, the 7-star hero and a direct descendant of Aaron Nibelung, as well as the disciple of the founding hero, Valor Joaquin. Known as the strongest human, Lord Klinge commanded attention, and the crowd quieted, returning to their seats. Media, the 7-star sage, greeted him, playfully commenting that it had been half a century since they last met. Despite the years, she hadn't started dressing like an academy director. She joked about turning 70 and how it didn't seem to affect her much, then offered to use her blessings to make Siegfried look 10 years younger. Siegfried, however, dismissed her offer, pointing out that while she approached 70, she still hadn't matured and insisted that humans should prioritize their inner nature. With a mocking grin, she called him an old fart, delighted to see he was just as rigid as ever. Siegfried, clearly irritated, did little to hide his annoyance. Media, on the other hand, noted how he had changed over the years, recalling how he'd brought her to places like this, remembering her previous disdain for people who had made her loathe even breathing the same air as them. Teasingly, she remarked that his granddaughter must be quite beautiful, and they both realized the test was about to begin. Inside the training hall, our boy scanned the room, acutely aware that he was the only one with black hair. Someone muttered whether he was the black-haired foreigner, and suddenly, the earlier whispers about him echoed in his mind. Just then, a striking girl entered the hall, capturing the attention of every student, including our boy. She was none other than Abel von Nibelung, the granddaughter of the Sword Emperor, the main heroine of the game and the sole reason our boy had spent a fortune on it. And here he was, hoping for a normal life. The subspace was a creation of the ancestral hero Valor Joaquin, who established this unique reality alongside the academy. This dimension was separate from the real world, where pain and damage were very real, yet there were no consequences in reality since there was no interference from the outside world. In subspace, even murder went unpunished, a perfect playground for the ambitious. As the atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, Sieg and Media discussed the upcoming battles in subspace, a time-honored tradition at the school. However, this year they were trying something new, a battle royale format. Participants would be split into groups of 10, and it would be a survival game with no restrictions on equipment. Sieg, ever the realist, pointed out that without restrictions, the privileged students would have an unfair advantage, a sentiment echoed in many anime plots featuring underdog protagonists against the elite. Media explained that they had to compromise because the academy was primarily funded by the nobility, and she had fought hard to introduce this new system. Inside the training hall, the students were admiring Abel von Nibelung, the granddaughter of the Sword Emperor. Meanwhile, our boy sat back, shocked to find that she was no longer just a 2D character on a screen. This felt completely different. He inwardly scoffed at the other students attempting to approach her, calling them fools. But deep down, he knew he might have done the same if he hadn't already played the game and learned better. As someone familiar with the game mechanics, he recalled that Abel possessed the miracle blessing M, a powerful boon that tied her to the game's protagonist. Beautiful people always seemed to have admirers at their side, and he realized that, as a special student, he didn't belong in their league. With a resigned sigh, he resolved to avoid getting involved in the social dynamics of the academy, hoping to steer clear of a noisy school life. He set 3 principles for his future: finish his studies without incident, secure a conventional job, and live a safe life. He couldn't shake the thought that the hero's job came with a huge salary, yet just the act of drawing his knife had left his body trembling. Let the hero protect the world, he mused, focusing instead on finding a more comfortable path in life. The class assignment exam for the 783rd year at Hoenn Academy began, and a mini floating machine appeared to explain the rules. As previously announced, this year's event would be a battle royale among 10 randomly assigned cadets. First place would be assigned to the Star class, while second and third would go to the Dragon class, and 8th to 10th place would be placed in the Ordinary class. Class assignments would depend entirely on these results with no time limit. Our boy's mind raced as he immediately recognized the setup. It was just like the game. Knowing his goal was to remain ordinary, he decided not to waste time and aimed to finish quickly. The subspace generation device activated, and the exam commenced. He resolved to avoid drawing his knife unless absolutely necessary, channeling his inner pragmatic hero as he navigated the strange new world. After a while, the evaluations for Group 24 were completed and announced, followed closely by the completion of Group 47's evaluations as well. While observing the results, media leaned over to Sieg and remarked that his granddaughter, with the bloodline of Changseong and Jialgang, was sure to achieve significant results. She was impressed by the record of 7 minutes and 14 seconds, noting that it was incredibly fast. Abel had opted for a C-rank weapon to ensure a fair assessment, yet she had still achieved a record, placing her among the top 10 in Academy history, though she couldn't quite break Sieg's own record. Sieg acknowledged this as natural for someone of the Nibelung bloodline, preparing to leave as he assumed the event was over. However, media interjected, informing him there was still one group left to evaluate. Sieg dismissed this as unimportant, likely filled with the offspring of pigs. Classic rich guy talk, reminiscent of snobby anime aristocrats. Just as he was about to leave, a sudden, strange sensation washed over everyone in the hall, causing an unsettling silence. Media turned to Sieg, questioning if he felt it too. Sieg considered the sensation unbelievable, his usual confidence shaken as a palpable tension filled the air. What was happening? As the confusion in the training hall reached its peak, they watched in disbelief as the very fabric of the sky broke apart, and 2 students tumbled out of the subspace, crashing to the ground. The audience was taken aback, whispering among themselves, wondering if they had stepped into a new anime where the laws of physics took a holiday. But then, as if on cue, another blinding light shone above, and a knife descended from the heavens, as if the universe had just said, "This is your protagonist's weapon. Get used to it." Media, ever the quick thinker, called for medical staff to check the vitals of the cadets who had just emerged from the chaotic rift. Among them lay our boy, who accepted the results as inevitable, predetermined from the start, like the fate of every low-tier character in an Isekai series. Earlier, students from the last group had begun fighting one another, and dread washed over him as he realized he had been caught in what could only be described as the Squad of Death. He recognized the notorious twins of malevolence, Mao Jun and Mao Shun, from the Iron King family. These brothers were infamous not just for their immense talent but also for their brutal violence and boundless cruelty. They were the kind of characters you might find in a shonen manga, known for turning every battle into a bloodbath. Kong recalled that the twins took pleasure in toying with weaker students for 30 minutes, prolonging their suffering like some sadistic game master. Completely ignoring him, the twins finished beating the other students and began discussing how many remained. June nonchalantly declared it was all over, while Shun, surprised, pointed out that he had taken care of 4 students himself. June then tossed the last remaining girl to Shun, who eagerly accepted the challenge. The poor girl trembled in fear as she watched the 2 brothers approach, her will to fight seeming to evaporate like a vaporwave dream. Shun, noticing her fear, leered at her with a smirk, remarking that she was just his type. He was curious if her screams would be as satisfying as he imagined. Just another day for a classic anime villain. June chided his younger brother for being a pervert, adding a comical touch that felt right out of a slice-of-life comedy. But as Shun prepared to unleash his wrath on the terrified girl, our boy couldn't stay silent any longer. He yelled out, questioning why they were taking things so far in what was essentially a simulation, labeling them psychopaths for their cruelty. Without fully realizing it, he stepped into the chaos. The twins turned their attention toward him, their eyes narrowing at the sight of his special student tag. They scoffed at him, calling him a lowlife, and Shun decided he would deal with him personally. June instructed his brother to rip out Kang's tongue for daring to disrespect them, a line that felt like it belonged in a horror anime rather than a school setting. Panicking, our boy wondered what he should do. He considered using his blessing of painlessness but quickly realized that avoiding pain for just 30 seconds wouldn't help against opponents who had been terrorizing their classmates for half an hour. As he scanned his surroundings, he spotted his knife nearby and hesitated, knowing that grabbing it would trigger the blessing. He recalled the intense pain he had endured earlier when he activated the blade. Just half a day into his new life, and he was already about to break the principles he had set for an ordinary, uneventful existence. The twins noticed him hesitating with the knife and taunted him, asking if he was mocking them. The terrified girl watched, anxiety etched on her face, as Shun prepared to finish Kong off painlessly, considering him an amusing distraction. He charged at Kong headfirst, ready to smash him like a villain from a poorly animated action flick. Realizing he couldn't afford to be picky now, Kong decided to use the blessing of painlessness for 30 seconds, hoping it would buy him some much-needed time. As he took a fighting stance, the blessing of the sword god activated, filling him with a rush of adrenaline and absurdity. He chuckled to himself at the thought of facing off against a bully with nothing but a sashimi knife. Wasn't that how every action movie ended in disaster? Shun scoffed at him, questioning what a pathetic knife could possibly do. Kong knew that, if he didn't finish off his opponent quickly, he would be the one to bite the dust. He felt the ridiculousness of holding a knife meant for cutting fish, not people, and wondered why gangsters in movies always wielded such tools. Did they not realize they were better suited for sushi? But then, a flicker of determination sparked within him as he remembered a crucial skill. If he struck, it would definitely slash the enemy. As Shun closed in, Kong swiftly slashed with the knife, cutting off the bully's arm in one decisive stroke. The battle ended in an instant, leaving everyone in the hall, students, faculty, and even the universe itself, gaping in shock, as if they had just witnessed a climactic moment from an epic shonen showdown. In his previous life, Kong had once asked his boss why gangsters in movies always used sashimi knives. His boss reacted by flinging a knife that missed Kong by a hair. With a sharp glare, he told Kong to stop asking dumb questions, and to remember to call him master. This master had once been a thug himself but had turned over a new leaf, cutting off one of his own wrists as penance. He had since opened a sashimi restaurant, claiming he now wanted to make people happy with his knife skills. Kong, genuinely impressed by his master's knife skills, had remained curious about the knives' use in gangster culture. He asked if it was just a movie trope or if gangsters really used sashimi knives in real life. His master's reply had been sharp and dismissive, implying that someone who knew about knives shouldn't even be asking such a question. But Kong explained his reasoning. A wide chef's knife might get stuck when stabbing someone because the skin would tighten, making it hard to pull out. A sashimi knife, being narrow, could stab repeatedly and withdraw easily. If it worked so well on fish, why not on people? The master, clearly irritated, had explained that cutting fish and cutting people were completely different. Fish lie down, making it easy to slice, but standing humans are a much harder challenge. He added sarcastically that even the god of knives would struggle to use a sashimi knife in that way. Kong had been disappointed, thinking his master simply lacked the skill. Of course, he didn't dare voice that thought. Now, in the present, Kong sliced clean through Shun's arm with his sashimi knife. The cut was so fast and precise that it stunned everyone. Blood gushed from Shun's wound as he screamed in agony. Staggering backward, Shun begged Kong to stay away and called out for his older brother to help him. But Kong wasn't about to show mercy. As Shun tried to crawl away, Kong followed him and, with another precise strike, cut open his skull. Jun, watching his younger brother fall, forced himself to stay calm. He reminded himself that they were in subspace, meaning Shun wasn't actually dead. Still, he couldn't help but wonder what was wrong with Kong. The way Kong used the knife looked like someone handling a blade for the first time, yet his strikes were unervingly accurate. Jun's breathing grew heavy as doubt crept in. Was it just luck? Or was that knife the reason? Taking no chances, Jun readied himself for a serious fight. He equipped his weapons in both hands and activated all three of his high-rank blessings, enhancing his defense and jump power. Confident in his abilities, Jun charged forward, certain that victory was his. He thought Kong was just standing there, defenseless, and planned to smash his opponent's head in one blow. But before Jun could land his attack, Kong acted. The fight ended in an instant. Jun fell to the ground, defeated, as the light of the subspace faded from his eyes. Kong, having won the fight, immediately felt the effects of the blessing wear off. Pain coursed through his entire body, far worse than anything he'd ever felt. Overwhelmed, he collapsed and lost consciousness. When Kong woke up, he found himself in a hospital bed. As he sat up, someone nearby noticed and called out to let others know he was awake. Looking around, Kong saw two unfamiliar yet instantly recognizable figures. One was Siegfried, the strongest human alive and one of the two 7-star heroes. The other was Media, the Academy's head sage. Both were legendary figures, and their presence left Kong uneasy. Siegfried asked about Kang's health, but Kong couldn't help wondering why such important people were here. Siegfried didn't waste time and got straight to the point. He wanted to know about the strange sensation everyone had felt earlier and Kang's actions in the subspace battle. Kong realized the phenomenon hadn't been his imagination. It had been real. Siegfried's cautious tone made Kong realize how dangerous it could be to draw the attention of someone this powerful. Carefully choosing his words, Kong explained that even though it was just a pocket dimension, he felt the twins' actions had gone too far, so he acted. However, he admitted that his response had been excessive and said he was ready to accept any punishment. Media broke the tension by teasing Siegfried for being so stern with a student. She revealed that Siegfried had personally treated Kang's injuries while he was unconscious, even unblocking his blood vessels. Kong noticed his body felt much lighter, and Media's playful tone made him feel even more out of place. Siegfried, clearly embarrassed, grumbled at Media for bringing it up. Kong began to understand why he felt so strangely rejuvenated. Media continued, explaining that they had reviewed footage of the subspace battle. She mentioned Kang's bravery in protecting a female student, calling him the prince she had always dreamed of. Her playful flirting left Kong feeling awkward, while Siegfried scolded her for her lack of professionalism. Media assured Kong that there would be no consequences for his actions. She even added that the Mao twins had only been admitted to the academy by currying favor with the elders, so their defeat was well-deserved. Relieved, Kong listened as Media revealed the main reason for their visit. He had achieved the top score in the exam. This news shocked Kong. Both Siegfried and Media congratulated him, but he was left questioning how things had gone so far off track. On his very first day, he had already broken all the principles he had set for himself. So much for an ordinary, uneventful school life. At the academy office, Media sighed deeply, reflecting on her nearly 20 years as the head of the academy. She couldn't recall any event as unprecedented as this. The scene shifted to earlier that day. Kong stood before Sieg and Media, expressing his dissatisfaction with the decision. Both leaders were visibly taken aback. Media, clearly puzzled, asked Kong if he truly understood what it meant to be part of the star class. She emphasized that the top cadet selection wasn't just a decision made by the academy elders but was directly influenced by the subspace, a mechanism imbued with the will of the founding hero. Kong, after a pause, reiterated that he simply didn't like the decision. Media and Sieg were stunned by his blunt response. Returning to the present, Media turned to Sieg and asked if he was upset that Kong had taken the top spot instead of his granddaughter. Sieg, who had seen the subspace footage, calmly replied that it would be foolish to question the judgment of the space, as it reflected the will of the Academy's founding hero. Since the system had chosen Kong as the top cadet, Sieg accepted the outcome without hesitation. Internally, Sieg couldn't help but dwell on Kang's performance. If Kang's skills had been extraordinary or his physical abilities exceptional, Sieg would have understood. Even remarkable combat experience would have been reasonable. But what Sieg saw in Kang's movements was something far more profound. It was as if Kang embodied the very essence of swordsmanship, the same ideal Sieg had pursued his entire life. However, Sieg couldn't ignore the strange sensation he'd felt when treating Kang's blocked meridians. Kang's soft, untrained body seemed to house something unnatural, something far beyond a typical cadet's capacity. For a moment, Sieg reflected on the odd competitiveness he felt toward a boy the same age as his granddaughter. It was absurd, yet undeniable. Later, Kang stood in front of the class board, confirming his placement in the wolf class. He felt this was the best compromise he could achieve under the circumstances. The scene transitioned to the headmaster's office, where Medea informed Kang that he would be moved to the upper class. However, Kang requested to be placed in Tiger class instead. Frustrated, Medea argued that the top cadet couldn't possibly be sent to such a class. Kang countered, questioning why the academy, which prided itself on equality, wouldn't let him choose his class. Medea, caught between frustration and concern, tried to reason with him, even offering to keep his abilities a secret. She worried that placing Kang in Tiger class could provoke the elders even further. Kang was confused by Medea's reaction. He had hoped to quietly finish his studies in a lower class, avoiding the chaos of the upper ranks. For now, this outcome still aligned with his plans, albeit imperfectly. When Kang entered the wolf class classroom, he was taken aback by its simplicity and the indifferent attitude of the students. They barely glanced at him before returning to their conversations, ignoring the green name tag on his uniform. Kang realized that Medea had succeeded in keeping his identity as the top cadet hidden. He considered this a stroke of luck. It meant he could stay under the radar. As Kang settled into his seat, a red-haired girl approached him. She thanked him for saving her during the exam, leaving him momentarily speechless. She reminded him of the subspace incident, speaking in a formal tone that Kang found unusual for someone their age. Kang downplayed the event, saying anyone would have done the same. However, the girl disagreed, insisting that what he did wasn't ordinary. Internally, Kang thought she was mistaken. He had acted out of survival, not heroism. Realizing they hadn't exchanged names, Kang introduced himself first. The girl followed, revealing her name was Chloe. Kang politely responded, though he couldn't shake the feeling that something about her didn't add up. He racked his brain trying to place her. Having played through most of the game's story, he couldn't recall Chloe being a part of it. Since the game's main plot revolved around the battle against the demon tribe later on, he concluded that Chloe might just be a background character like himself. Kang asked Chloe to keep the events of the exam a secret, and she agreed. As she was about to say more, the teacher entered the room, instructing everyone to take their seats. Kang told Chloe they could continue their conversation later, and she nodded. The teacher, Lee Wanbin, introduced himself as the instructor for Wolf class. He congratulated the students on their admission to the academy and reminded them that they carried the legacy of the founding hero Valor Joaquin. He encouraged them to take pride in their accomplishments. For their first day, Lee announced they would start with basic physical training. He instructed the students to change into their training clothes and meet at the training ground in 30 minutes. When a student asked for details, Lee explained that the regimen would include 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, and 10 laps around the training ground. After confirming there were no further questions, Lee dismissed the class. The students enthusiastically responded and left to prepare. Kang, however, wasn't thrilled. Sitting alone, he questioned whether the academy's training was designed to turn students into Saitama. Hoping to avoid the hassle, he approached Lee, claiming he wasn't feeling well. Lee, unimpressed, suggested Kang join the star class if he wanted to avoid physical activities. Frustrated, Kang changed his excuse, saying he urgently needed to use the restroom. Lee smirked and sarcastically remarked that this was what he expected from the top cadet before dismissing Kang with a knowing smile. At the training ground, Kang struggled through the laps. Exhausted, he noticed the other students were far ahead of him. Chloe, seemingly unfazed by the rigorous training, approached Kang and asked if he was okay. Kang denied having any trouble, though his labored breathing betrayed his words. When Chloe asked what lap he was on, Kang reluctantly admitted he was on his 5th. Curious, he asked Chloe about her progress, expecting her to be behind. To his shock, she casually mentioned that she was on her 9th lap. She smiled cheerfully, encouraged Kang to keep going, and sprinted ahead with ease. Kang could only watch in disbelief as she effortlessly passed him, leaving him to question how someone so unassuming could be so far ahead.
To be continued. If you want to watch the next part, then like and subscribe and let me know in the comment of what recap you want to watch next.